I'm Julie Bulitt. I've been a family therapist for over 30 years.
I'm David Bulitt. I've been a divorce and family lawyer for more than 35 years.
Together, we have been married for more than 37 years.
In our professional practices, the two of us have been witnesses to individuals and families struggling with life's most difficult challenges. In this podcast, we will talk about the conversations we have had,
The conversations we should have had.
and those that every relationship needs to have in order to find success, happiness, and fulfillment.
This is Conversations for Couples.
The podcast. Welcome back, folks, to Conversations for Couples.
The podcast.
She almost missed her line.
I didn't have enough coffee yet.
She almost missed her line.
I did. I almost missed my line.
We're recording today. Folks, we have author, advocate, speaker, host of her own podcast. She's been published in the Boston Globe, Psychology Today, HuffPost, and others. Jessica Fein. Jessica, she and her husband, like Julie and myself, are adoptive parents. She adopted 3 children. And we are really, really happy to have you here today to talk about your journey with your family and with your husband. Welcome aboard.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
We are too. We spent some time looking at your book, which I guess came out about a year ago. It's called It's called Breathtaking, a Memoir of Family, Dreams, and Broken Genes. And we will put the link in our show notes so that you can easily click on that. But so what I'd like to start, Jessica, is with the beginning in terms of your relationship with Rob. And what caught my eye was a line someplace where you said that the two of you, he was the blue-eyed Robert Redford and you were the frizzy-haired Barbara Streisand from The Way We Were. And I'm old enough to remember that movie. So tell us a little bit about, how you two got started together, whether there was any bumps along the way prior to your marriage, and let's jump off from there.
All right. Well, yes, that's one of my favorite lines too, because it was so true that we were not at face value the two people you would put together. We had come from wildly different upbringings. He was raised in a small town in Michigan. I was raised just outside of Boston. I was raised in a Jewish family. He was not. He was raised in a Christian family, Protestant family. And, we were just really kind of came from very different worlds. And we met in college and never would have imagined that I would never have imagined at that point, this is going to be your life partner. It's funny, in revisionist history, his mother always said, oh, you two knew from the start. And I'm like, oh, no. In fact, we dated for 10 years before we got married.
Wow.
And within those 10 years, we had what I refer to as a 1.5-year hiatus. So we did split up.
Mm-hmm.
And then we found our way back together and really surprised, most of all ourselves, I think, that we ended up together after those 10 years.
Very cool. Now you had a sister, Naomi, with whom you were very close, I understand.
Yes. So I was one of 3. We each grew up as one of 3, actually. I was 3 girls and he grew up one of 3 boys. I was the youngest. He was the middle. And yes, so my sister Naomi was 3 years older than me. And we were, that beautiful thing that happens sometimes with sisters who are also best friends.
Yeah.
Nice.
And that was us. And when I was 27 and she was 30, she died suddenly. Now, I will say, since this is Conversations for Couples, and we started off by talking about my relationship with Rob and I were at that point living together back in the Boston area, but we were not engaged yet. And I bring that up because what we went through together with that sudden death and that total devastation did end up leading to a different depth or a different kind of knowing of each other in our relationship. And we did get married shortly thereafter. But my sister's death really was the one that changed me dramatically. And I say the one that changed me because having read the book, that I've had a tremendous amount of loss. And that this was the first one that really punctured the bubble I had been living in up until that time.
Wow. Wow. So it's interesting that you talk about that, that trauma, that crisis point that you had with losing your sister, and how it sounds like it deepened your relationship with Rob.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, I can see where when you go through any kind of trauma, right? Typically, it's going to have one or the other reaction. Either you're going to get closer than ever or it's going to split you up. I don't think
That's right.
anybody emerges in the same equilibrium they were in before. So yeah, I mean, it was an interesting thing because what happened was it was a real window into my community and the Jewish community for Rob, who actually ended up converting after we had gone through that. And like I said, we were married. I guess it was probably about a year and a half later. Yeah, and so that was also the first kind of experience I had with inviting joy to come in and take root in the midst of total devastation.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit? So you were together 10 years, you got married, and what was your journey towards adoption? Can you tell us a little bit about
Sure.
that?
It was a long and circuitous route, I will tell you that. So we thought we were going to, a year after we got married, we thought, okay, we're going to have a family. We kind of went for it. I mean, of course, after like our first time trying, assumed I was pregnant. So that's a whole other story. But I was like, of course I'm pregnant. I have to, I totally treated myself like, gingerly, did not have any alcohol. Was like, I better not have any physical stress. I mean, mind you, this was like the day after we
Of
had,
course. And how many pregnancy tests did you buy?
Right, exactly. And then when I wasn't pregnant, I was like shocked. What do you mean? Like I couldn't understand.
Yes.
Well, that, what I call surprise disappointment continued for about a year. And then we started inviting the Boston medical community into our bedroom,
Yes.
figuratively, not literally, and dipped our toe into fertility treatments and ultimately just like plunged right in. So we did everything. I mean, we spent 5 years. I had 25 procedures, IUI, IVF, and we ultimately started using a gestational carrier. We used two different carriers, and our 25th procedure, the carrier got pregnant and ended up losing that pregnancy. But what happened was probably in about year 4 of that 5-year journey, we started to explore adoption. And so then we were kind of doing both things simultaneously because, adoption can take a long time, obviously, And so we were exploring that, but we were still doing the treatments. And the treatments were depleting and depressing, and adoption was like exhilarating, right?
Yes.
We knew that it was going to end with us being parents. Whereas on
Right.
the other side of the coin,
Yes.
all of these treatments were just causing physical pain and emotional pain and all the stuff. And we started to really fall in love with the idea of adoption. Like we didn't see it as kind of the booby prize. We really started to be, even if it's possible, more committed to that path. And so after the 25th procedure, and the doctor was like, well, you can try again if we do this and that and the other thing. We're like, but no, we're done. Like our babies are waiting for us in another country. Because what happened was once we decided on adoption, we both fell in love with the idea of international adoption. And so that was going to be the route for us. And we didn't really feel any particular draw to one country over another. We were very open, and we just learned about the adoption systems and practices in different countries. And, it was very different then. We're talking about, 20 plus years ago than it is today, obviously. Well, obviously for anybody who knows about adoption and international adoption. So at that time, we identified Guatemala as the place where our babies would be born. And so as soon as that 25th procedure failed, we closed that book for good, put it in the basement in some dusty old file cabinet, and really ran toward the idea of adoption.
Wow. I'm just kind of processing that you had 25 procedures, because I've talked to through the years of being an adoptive parent and also a social worker that works in the adoption arena. I talk to people all the time about their journey like if you're doing infertility treatments, like how long do you keep on going? And I always tell people it's your own race. It's like some people are willing to run a mile and others are willing to do a marathon. And
Yes.
boy, you were the
I
triathlon
was,
of you were
that's
doing
the only
Ironmans.
aspect of my life where we could ever call me a triathlete. But I will say, it's so alluring because you learn about the next thing and you think, well, that one's definitely going to work. I mean,
Yeah.
IUI, intrauterine insemination, we felt like that's relatively easy compared to the
Right.
other stuff. And that seems like, oh, well, that's got to work. And it was just, so
Mm-hmm.
you do it, and it took, a few minutes, kind of thing. I mean, I'm exaggerating now, in retrospect, and of course there were medications and procedures and everything associated with that. But then it's like you hear about the person who tried such and such, and that
Mm-hmm.
worked.
Yep.
And so you're like, okay, now I'm going to do that. And then you hear about, oh, but this center, it's alluring. And you get on that ride, and you
Yeah.
just keep thinking, well, maybe it's the next one. Maybe it'll be the next one. And you don't want to give up because you feel like I've come this far already.
Yeah. Right.
And then the idea of a gestational carrier was such a beautiful idea because it was going to be, our embryo in somebody else's uterus. So it would be, biologically our kid.
Mm-hmm.
But boy, that opened up a whole other
Mm-hmm.
vat of confusion and mystery and a big financial
Yes, I
commitment as well.
imagine. I always imagine. So how did you and Rob process sort of the end of that, we're not going to have biological children, because there's grief and loss in that, infertility period, and when you finally come to that.
Yeah, I think because our paths crossed over, that we were on two tracks simultaneously, the
Mhm.
adoption and the fertility stuff, it was less of, okay, let's take time, let's process the end, let's think about what's next. We were already on to what's next.
Mhm.
So I think that helped. I think over the years, it's been, what if that had turned out differently? Once every few years, a fleeting thought that comes in and out. But I feel like because we had processed so much disappointment along those 5 years,
Mhm.
that the idea that this other path would be a sure thing
Mhm.
made us, greet it with open arms, much more so than we looked at what we were saying goodbye to.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
yeah,
that control piece,
Oh, the control.
with
Oh,
adoption, we felt the same way.
We did.
Felt the same way. We did infertility light. We did not do a lot, but we felt
It was
like
enough for me.
it was enough for him. Any needles or medications, and he was like running the other way. So for us, it was a different journey. But the thing is, you can get, this was back in the day, we got a phone line. We started doing advertising. We could talk to potential birth mothers. Like we felt like we had control over something. We go get fingerprinted, home
yes.
studies.
There's
Like,
stuff to do that
Yeah.
it's going to end in success, but
Yes.
it's such an illusion. I mean, it makes me laugh in retrospect. Yes, we felt like we now finally had control, right? We could
Yes.
pick the country. We were going to be able to, all these things. And it would definitely end in us being parents.
Yeah.
But it makes me laugh now because I think about, here we were intertwining our future with a woman we'd probably never meet in a country we'd
Yeah.
never been to, who spoke a language we didn't speak. And we were like, yes, now we're in control. I mean, talk about really just giving yourself up to the idea that what's going to happen is going to happen. But it felt by comparison like we had control.
I want to ask you one other question about the infertility period before we move to your adoption and your kids. You talked about disappointment, and I know we experienced that too. Now, how, if at all, did that affect, your relationship with Rob? I mean, because it was a persistent, consistent. I remember it was a roller coaster. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. Whoop, no, it didn't work out. Now we're going to try this. We're building up. Whoop, no, it didn't work out. Julie talks a lot about leaning in as opposed to leaning out during difficult times, and so I'm interested to know, how did that affect the two of you? How you were getting along, your relationship during that period of time?
Yeah, I love that visual of leaning in versus leaning out. And that was definitely what we did. I think, it really, if anything, brought us together. It was so, parts of it were just ludicrous when I think back now. And I think about, like you said, the needles, the shots, like all the weird places we'd be when we'd be like, up at 6:12 p.m., got to get the shot, and like be ducking behind this or doing, like, it brought us together in this shared bizarre adventure we were on, you know? And I can see again, like in everything we've been through by now, I can see how any of that can break a couple. And I feel like if it doesn't break you, you're like impenetrable, you know,
Yeah,
unbreakable.
makes you stronger,
That's
right?
right.
What does not kill you makes you stronger,
That's what
right?
they say. Yeah. So you ended up adopting 3 children, but not at the same time,
Not
right?
at the
From
same
Guatemala.
time. Yes, I have to
So
clarify that because
so
sometimes when I
tell
say
us
we
about
adopted three.
your 3 kids and when they were born and how far apart
Yeah.
they were.
So our first, well, it was interesting because I kind of thought, again, the illusion of control. I kind of thought we'd get a newborn girl. Like I had, you know, like I said, I came from 3. I was always a girl's girl. I had a lot of girlfriends and I assumed I'd be the mother of a girl first. And I assumed, you know, she'd be an infant. That's one of the reasons we had chosen Guatemala, was getting those very young babies. So we got a call. There's a 9-month-old baby boy. And that was very different, you know, but
Mm-hmm.
okay. So at that time, there was a lot of turmoil in the adoption system. This was 2001 into 2002. Ultimately, it shut down in 2007. So it was in those years where we had, you know, got our three kiddos. But that time we got the referral at 9 months, and it wasn't until our little guy was 15 months that we were able to go to Guatemala.
Wow.
And at the time, they did not invite you to come see the child before adoption. So we waited from 9 months to 15 months before we were able to go and bring Jojo home. And that was a real shock. And it's something I don't think people talk about enough. This isn't something that I actually talk about that often. It's not my book or anything, but that was a really hard transition. And I think that for adoptive parents, especially ones who have been on such a long journey to parenthood, there's an assumption that, you know, when you bring that baby home, all is, you know, butterflies and rainbows and, you know, it's everything is very la-di-da. And that was a tough period. I mean, adjusting, going from no kids to having a running toddler, you know,
Yes.
that was hard. That took a
Yeah.
while to adjust. And while adjusting, we knew we were now like on a baby making roll. Like we immediately put in the paperwork for baby number 2 because we always knew we would have more than one.
Mm-hmm.
Both of us having come from a sibling relationship and me having just lost my sister. So 2 years later, we went to Guatemala and brought back our daughter, Dahlia. Dahlia was referred to us at birth, so that was quite different. And by then, just 2 years later, the rules had changed in a number of ways. So first of all, not only were we invited, we were required to go to Guatemala, meet her, fill out paperwork, then come back and wait for our official invitation. So we met Dahlia when she was 3 months and brought her home at 6 months.
Wow.
Also, the rules in Guatemala, or the safety in Guatemala, had changed considerably.
Right.
So it was not looked well upon at all to be out and about. Foreign adoptions were frowned upon at best, right? But, you know, so when we'd go out in the days we were in Guatemala, I would put Dahlia in like one of those, you know, baby Bjorn, whatever they're called, and then put a poncho over. So,
Oh.
you know, a light poncho so that it wasn't clear that we had, you know, we're out and about with this baby. So that was different. And when we ended up getting our third, by the way, 2 years later, right before it shut down, we were told we cannot leave the hotel with the baby. So things really did.
Wow.
Those were the years when everything was in flux.
Interesting. That is that's fascinating, and I hadn't heard that piece of it. I mean, I've known that international adoption has changed through the years, but I never thought about like you being in the middle of that change
Yes.
almost.
And we kind of, you know, we knew getting Theo, who was our littlest, when we did that was like we were in the last wave.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, how long during each of the adoptions, how long did you have to stay in Guatemala before you could bring the baby
Yeah,
home?
well, it's interesting. So we went to Guatemala 5 times for the 3 adoptions, and they were all very quick trips, particularly as it pertained to Theo, because when we were in the process of adopting Theo, my mother was dying from breast cancer.
Oh, wow.
And when we finally got the invitation to come and meet Theo and sign that paperwork, my mom was really sick. She was in the hospital. And it was a real push me, pull me of, do we go to Guatemala? My mom might not survive until we come back, the doctors are telling us. But if we don't go to Guatemala, we don't get this baby. So it was just, I mean, really, really a tough sandwich situation to be in. And so that time we went for just 2 nights.
Oh,
So
wow.
most of our trips were very quick. I think, and especially once we had the little guy at home, right? Once we had our first, we didn't want to be away for very long.
Right.
So, I mean, we went 5 times, but I think we were mostly 2, 3, 4 nights max.
Yeah.
Okay.
So tell us about, so you got these 3 kids from Guatemala, which is amazing. And I've worked with many, many Guatemala adoptees. And I have to say, they've been some of my favorite. I don't know why, but I love people from Guatemala and their stories. I don't know. I have some favorite clients over the years that have been from Guatemala. And tell us about sort of your journey. I know that your daughter became sick, and I want to hear sort of the timeline around that.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting because of all of our kids, the only birth mother we ever met was Dahlia's birth mother. And we met her twice. So the first time was when we went to adopt Dahlia. And there's like a whole entourage that comes to meet you, right? Because you have the interpreter and you have the lawyer and you have the foster mother. And if there are foster siblings, they come along too. And then Dahlia's birth mother and birth grandmother came. Now they had put Dahlia in foster care at birth, but they came for this exchange, if you will. And they were so lovely. And it was interesting. The birth mother, felt like so young compared to me. I'm sure she was, but then the birth grandmother was there too. I bring this up because it becomes relevant later in a way we never could have imagined. So we had the amazing opportunity to meet them. And then 2 years later, when we went back with our Theo adoption, we were still working with the same agency, the same lawyers, and so they had told us that Dahlia's birth mother and birth grandmother wanted to come see us to hear how Dahlia was doing. And this is like not typical at all. In international adoption, often, the birth parents are not on the scene. Well, when we met them again the second time, just 2 years later, the birth mother had transformed physically. She had lost a tremendous amount of weight, and she was quite slim to begin with. And she was leaning on her mother, the birth grandmother, for support when they were walking down the hotel hall. She was quite visibly ill. And when we asked what was happening, they didn't know. They said they think maybe something's going on with her stomach. They just weren't sure. They were from a very rural part of Guatemala. Like, they didn't know. And we never, ever, ever would have imagined that whatever it was that birth mother was dealing with would end up defining our lives. But if we could have flashed forward, which thank God we couldn't have, we would have seen that. Because what happened was we brought Dahlia home, as I said, at 6 months. And, like with all the kids, it was love at first sight. And Dahlia was feisty and sweet and a total love bug. And as she was developing, as she was getting older, 1 year, 2 years, it seemed like her development wasn't quite matching where JoJo's had been. And, it's so hard because we want to say, like, am I being too, are my expectations too high? Am I being a helicopter mom? Like, is something wrong? Is this,
Am I just being an adoptive mom?
Yeah, exactly. But, her gait was wobbly and her speech was garbled. So, I'd bring it up with the doctor and the doctor over and over, let's give it some time. She'll catch up,
Yeah.
And I had early intervention come out to the house and they said, oh, she's on the lower end of average. She'll catch up. 3 times they said that. 3 times I had them come out. They did not like me very much by time number 3. They definitely thought I was just a helicopter mom. But ultimately, after a few years of this, the doctor suggested a hearing test for Dahlia because it was a balance issue and a speech issue. Maybe there was something going on with her hearing. And in fact, she was diagnosed with mild to moderate sensorineural. I don't know. I'm just mispronouncing words. But in any event, mild to moderate hearing loss. And it was something that would be corrected with hearing aids. So that could have been the end of the story, except there was a big question mark now. Why did she have hearing loss? This kind of hearing loss can be because of something genetic. It can be something happened in utero. It can be a virus at birth. We didn't know. So we got referred to genetic testing. And in the rare disease community, which we would soon become part of, we hear about this diagnostic odyssey that families go on, and it can take years and years and years. You know, relatively speaking, this wasn't that long of an odyssey, but it definitely felt like it at the time. So in any event, we got referred to genetic testing, and it was an immediate diagnosis of an ultra-rare mitochondrial disease called MERF syndrome, which stands for myoclonic epilepsy, ragged red fibers. And Dahlia was diagnosed with that at a very young age. And it's a rare disease. There was not a lot of information. All they could tell us was this is degenerative. There's no cure. Any treatment will be to manage symptoms. And that was what we were given at when Dahlia was about 5 years old.
5. Okay. And was birth mom still alive at that point?
So that's a very excellent question, because immediately, like that night, I got in touch with the adoption agency and said, you got to find, you know, so-and-so. Now we had figured out what was wrong with her, right? But now it was, well, let's see. It had been, we had seen her the second time in 2007, and now here we were. So it was about 3 years later, and they were not able to find her.
Yeah. So you get this diagnosis. You know, I can't even imagine how do you process it? How do you go forward? Tell us about that.
First of all, there was tons of confusion. You know, like, what are mitochondria? Why do we need them? Can she get a mitochondrial transplant? Like, we knew nothing. We are not scientists. We are not researchers. We are not. And despite that, I figured I'd personally find a cure for this disease, because that's what we do, right?
Right.
So, I mean, I set about like, okay, we'll get this done. That's, you know, and I started doing all the, you know, hours and hours doing research on and trying to find studies and trials and, you know, whatever I could. And in the meantime, Dahlia was growing into this, you know, glorious person, getting older and learning, and also losing. And those two things were happening simultaneously. You know, she would be learning new skills, she'd be losing old skills. And so it was a very confusing time. And then I finally did find a study. And it wasn't exactly for her disease, which is so rare. There was no study specifically on hers, but it was for this particular family of mitochondrial diseases. And I worked and worked and worked to get Dahlia accepted into that study. And it took years to do that, because at that time, NIH was shut down for a period of time, and you needed to qualify for the study by having biopsies and watching the cells grow and seeing if they'd respond to the medicine and all this kind of thing. And in the meantime, life went on. And then Dahlia was about to turn 9, and we went on a family vacation to Florida. And while we were there, Dahlia caught a cold, and that cold turned into pneumonia, and she became very ill and was intubated in a hospital in Florida where nobody had heard of MERF syndrome, where there was no metabolic specialist, where we were the experts telling people. Medical staff would come in and say, well, I just Googled the disease, right? Like, people didn't know anything about it. So we fought to get back to Boston, which was a whole other saga, and ultimately did. And Dahlia, as I mentioned, was intubated, and we stayed in the intensive care unit for 3 months trying to get over this hump, if you will.
Wow.
And during that time, Dahlia lost a lot of functionality and was not able to return to breathing independently. So she kept going into respiratory distress, and she would be extubated, intubated, etc., until ultimately she needed a tracheotomy, which, for people who don't know, is when you have a little hole in your neck. And in Dahlia's case, she had a tube that attached to a ventilator, so she was bypassing the typical breathing patterns. It also meant she could no longer speak or eat. She turned 9 in the hospital, and when we left 3 months later, she had lost that ability, as I mentioned, to eat, to speak. She could no longer walk. She was wheelchair bound, and she was attached to a ventilator. Also, during those 3 months, we got accepted into the clinical trial.
Oh, wow.
So we came home from the hospital in May, and we were set to go to DC in October. And we had our plane tickets, and they had sent us, you know, all the protocols, and even like the restaurants in the vicinity. And a week or so before we were set to go, they determined that Dahlia was not well enough to participate in the study.
Yeah.
So that was yet another turning point, because now we knew that this whole hope of we're going to get, this is going to, we're going to be cured and this is going to happen, that really was squashed, if you will. And that was at 9. And for the next 8 years, Dahlia died 1 week after her 17th birthday. She was an eyes-on patient, meaning she was home in our house, but we had essentially an ICU set up in our house with that kind of machinery and medications, equipment, because Dahlia continued to get sicker and to lose more and more functionality, including not being able to move at all for the last 2 years of her life.
Oh my goodness.
Also, she was what was called an eyes-on patient, meaning myself or my husband or a nurse trained specifically in her care had to be watching her 24/7. She couldn't be alone for even a moment because of this ventilator dependency. So life changed really, really dramatically and continued to change in big ways and small, almost on a daily basis. You don't see it until you step back. I think about, we couldn't look up because we were so in it. We were on the precipice 24/7. And if we had looked up and kind of taken in the big picture, we would have crumpled.
Yeah, you wouldn't been able to do it.
So tell us a little bit during that period of time, during this eyes-on period. Again, I want to toggle back to you and Rob. This is, you're a team, you're working together. You also have 2 other children who have their own needs and wants and, whatever it is they were doing. How are you managing your relationship between the 2 of you and your relationship with your other kids during this period of time?
Yeah. It sounds a little bit fantastical when I say I guess we leaned in. Let me put it that way, to quote you. And what was what made it work, and look, we know that the vast majority of couples who have a special needs kid, let alone medically complex life and death situation, don't stay together. That's a fact. We worked because we were both 100% fully in it. It was not like one of us shouldered the responsibility and the other one was like the supporting actor. We were both equally in it. Second, our skills, if you will, were complementary, not redundant. So Rob, and Rob's a high school English teacher. Like, he's not a medical guy either, right? But he really learned everything about Dahlia's care. So he became so expert that doctors would be, looking to him for many of the things. No, I don't want to take it away. I mean, he was never a medical expert in the sense of, the bigger picture, but he was the Dahlia expert. And he was the one who did the intense hands-on medical care. And there's so much. I mean, there's changing a trach and there's, all these things that are life and death. And he mastered it.
Wow.
And I was like so organized. We both worked this whole time, by the way. He, as I mentioned, was a teacher. I was in corporate. So, who was what nursing agencies we were working with and who was where, when, and, all of that kind of thing. So I think that we were very complementary, and we also gave each other space, which I think was really important. So we prioritized, he had a night off during the week. I had a night off during the week, which might not sound like much to most people, but it was huge to us.
It was everything. Yeah, that is.
And so, and then we worked to try to have a date night whenever we could, which was also important, and in order to do that, we needed to hire 2 people, a nurse and a babysitter. It was not an easy thing to do, but we did prioritize that as well. So that was what we did. And,
you said that, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you mentioned before that Rob converted to Judaism earlier in your relationship. Did faith, was there any aspect, and I ask you that because, not because I read that you did or you didn't, that it was or it wasn't, but our second book is called The Secrets of Strong Couples. And one of the things that we found, and we interviewed many, many couples who, like you and your husband, got through very difficult life events and things and came out stronger. And, we went into that book trying to figure out, what was it? Was there one magic pill? Was there more, and there, of course, there wasn't one magic pill, but there was a lot of themes that ran through. And one of them was the fact that a lot of folks shared faith, and that was important to them. So I was just curious whether that was, and there's not a right or wrong answer,
No,
obviously,
it's
but I
a
was
great
just curious whether that had
question.
anything to do with helping the two of you through.
It's such a good question. I don't think faith helped. I think we had been through something so profound with the loss of my sister
Yeah.
that any notion that life is fair did not exist for us at that point. So I think that played a role. I do think that everything that happened after that first sudden loss lay on top of that loss. And so faith, we believed in her, we believed in each other, we believed in our family. I don't think that God, in the way that, in any kind of conventional way, sustained us.
Okay.
I think also we didn't have any illusions that life was fair because we had seen what happened to my sister. So for me, that was kind of a big thing. Also, by the way, I had watched my parents lose their daughter. And yes, I was older at the time. I wasn't living at home, but that was, imprinted on me. And I saw them get through that, or continue on, I should say. And I saw that they were able to live full lives. They were able to smile and laugh and carry on alongside that devastation. So look, when we're in it, am I thinking any of this stuff? Of course not. I'm thinking about okay, how much, how many cc's in the syringe do we need at 10:03? But in retrospect, when I look back, and some of the things that I talk about in my book are really how I wasn't even aware that I was absorbing these experiences of my parents, my siblings. Because the other thing that happened is that 3 years before Dahlia died, my other sister died.
Oh my goodness.
So
You've had a lot of loss.
yeah. Yes.
Wow. So one of the things that as a therapist I do with clients is when they have a difficult situation that they've gotten through, I ask them to take a snapshot. And sometimes they actually take a picture, and sometimes they just remember the moment. And as you're talking about losing your daughter, losing your sister, two sisters, it sounds like you use those snapshot moments of this happened and I got through it. And you're able to sort of build on that. And I love that you're doing that. Like that's what you hold on to when you have nothing else.
I love that idea of a snapshot. And I feel like I would have like albums and albums and albums
Yes, you
of
do.
snapshots.
You do.
I love that idea. I feel like was I cheated by not being able to grow old with my sisters, by not being able to see Dahlia? I mean, she'd be 20 now. Like, what would a 20-year-old Dahlia be? Yes, of course. They were cheated a lot more than I was, and I think about that all the time. I think about them and what happened to them more than I think about what happened to me. And now I get to share their stories.
Yes.
And I get to carry on their legacies in so many different ways, and that's really, really important to me.
Yeah. What do you do to honor Dahlia? Because I can just tell by all the stuff that you were doing while you were, negotiating this situation. I know there's something that happened afterwards or that still happens for you. So tell us about that.
Thank you for letting me talk about her and what I do. So first of all, one of the most gratifying things for me is when readers of my book, Breathtaking, will write to me and say, oh, I feel like I got to know Dahlia. And, that makes me so happy because when somebody dies, particularly at that young age, you think, oh my God, nobody else is ever going to get to know this magical human. So, by writing about her in different outlets or, sharing different stories in my book, it's so amazing when people say that they feel like their lives have been enhanced because they now know her. So that's one way. And then, of course, by the way, conversations like these where I get to talk about her. So that's one thing. A second thing is that quite literally, my husband has poured himself into Dahlia Gardens. So it was really a beautiful thing that somebody did really shortly after Dahlia's death. One of my husband's buddies came over and planted a Dahlia garden in front of our house, which my husband has now grown into this just amazing garden. And it's really a very therapeutic thing for him. And then we love, we see dahlias for a great part of the year. The other thing is that we are really proud to have a program called Dahlia's Wish, where we send, in partnership with Mito Action, we send children and their whole families for a full week to on their wish trip, which is to Disney through Give Kids the World Village. And we had done that ourselves through Make-A-Wish. And now we're able to facilitate several families a year doing something like that in Dahlia's name. And so even just when we hear from those families and they say, even, they're saying her name now when they say Dahlia's Wish. And so that's really beautiful for us.
That's beautiful.
Really so I have to ask you one almost last question.
Okay.
Tell us about Blackie.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. So this is our dog, Blackie O. And, I am not a dog person, but I'm a Blackie O person because I don't really think Blackie O is even a dog. I think he's like some spiritual creature that came here for a reason, I talk about a belief in, a faith and belief in that kind of thing. So when we were in the hospital, they had therapy dogs that would come even into the ICU. It was amazing. And Dahlia kept saying, I want one. And we were like, whatever you want, you want a unicorn? We'll figure that out. And so a friend of mine actually in LA, the total other side of the country, found this little guy in a shelter and took him home and got to know him and decided, yes, this is Dahlia's dog. And flew from LA to Boston and gave us this dog. And pretty much right away, he decided he was Dahlia's and Dahlia was his. And he changed things for us because, first of all, he would sit on Dahlia's lap in the wheelchair. Now, you take a kid out in a wheelchair without a dog on their lap and people are staring and Dahlia, by the way, also had a tube coming out of her neck and hearing aids and goggles and the whole thing. And, that was tough. Now you put the cutest dog in the world on that kid's lap and people are coming over and, she's the center of attention for a different reason. And he just always stayed by her side. I mean, he would wait for her all day long while she was at school and he'd hear that van coming up the driveway and his tail would start thwapping, I
so sweet.
Think it would fall off. It was going so much. And he would be in her room all the time with her for all those years. And he was magic.
Yeah.
And it was magic because we still have him.
You still have him, and he's part of Dahlia.
Yeah. Well, this has just been really, really enjoyable speaking with you and so insightful and uplifting in many, many ways. Jessica, folks want to try to get a hold of you, find out what you're doing, how you
read your book,
hear your story. You may have heard one of our two dogs barking in the background as we tie things up. That's I
love when people reach out to me. I love having conversations. So first of all, of course, Breathtaking. And my name is F like Frank, E-I-N. That's the one thing that confuses people. It's fine, but it's F-E-I-N.
Okay.
So you can find the book wherever you love to get your books. You can check out my website, which is kind of the central thing, which is jessicafeinstories.com. Connect with me on Instagram or Facebook. Get my Substack. Every week I'm writing to people, and that's on Substack, Fine by Me. Nice. So a lot of different places. I'm kind of everywhere. Great. I have a TED Talk you can check out as well. Jessica Fein. Just Google me and a lot of stuff.
We'll put everything in our show notes. And, and again, thanks so much for being here.
And sharing your story.
And sharing your family story and Blackie O's story and all the rest.
Dahlia's
of it.
Story.
Folks, thanks for joining us today on Conversations for Couples.
The podcast.
We'll see you next time.
Julie Bulitt is a professionally licensed clinical social worker and family therapist. David Bulitt is a divorce and family lawyer. Julie is not your therapist, and David is not your lawyer. This podcast is meant for educational and entertainment purposes only.